The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
I am back. New York Yankee baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I have a thrill for you. He's Gene Hutmaker, an author, a Yankee hater, and a Yankee worshiper. Am I right about that, Gene Hutmaker?
Well, the worshiper is spelled W-A-R, not W-O-R.
No, I would say that from reading your book, from talking to you all these many months, that you have more of a respect for the Yankees than you do for any other franchise.
I would say I have realism.
Okay, and the realism is 27 World Championships.
But in my lifetime, 11, count from 1954, and since my teams have won all the rest, that's not too bad.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to cover something today which we rarely get to cover on this show, and it is because of my respect for what I consider to be the last of the great Yankee dynasties. And not that there haven't been many since, but listen, this could be the greatest dynasty of all time. From 1949 to 1953, the Yankees won all 5 World Championships. And if you stop to think about that, the competition was, amongst other teams, were the Brooklyn Dodgers along the way, and the Milwaukee Braves. They came a little bit later, but if you begin to see the enormity of it, it's incredible. And what I'd like to cover today, there were 12 players that played in all 5 World Championships. And let's go over them one by one. And let's start with a fella that wrote a book entitled The October 12. And pretty much Phil Rizzuto didn't write the book. Tom Horton wrote the book. But Phil Rizzuto's name is on the cover, and they talk about the 12 players that transcended the beginning to the end, 1949 to 1953. Start with Phil Rizzuto, Hall of Famer, but didn't make the Hall of Fame until like maybe 25 years after he was eligible. Tell me what you think of Phil Rizzuto.
Phil Rizzuto had the endorsement of 2 of the greatest players of all time, Ted Williams and Ty Cobb. They both loved the way Rizzuto played the game. Now, I would say he has maybe 4 Hall of Fame years at the most, but he was an MVP and a runner-up MVP, and he only got 15-something hundred hits, but he did lose 3 years to the war, which probably would have given him over 2,000. And they raved about his fielding. Supposedly, too, I heard, growing up in that era, right after, I heard how he used to funnel the ball over to Billy Johnson, who played third base for him, and hit gun people out at first base. Rizzuto was sort of like an Altuve of his time. Of course, no power or anything, but at 5'5" or whatever he was.
He was 5'5", and ironically, he had a history with the manager, Casey Stengel, whose first year as a manager was 1949. But he had been the Dodger manager before that. And Phil Rizzuto, as a real young guy, tried out for the Dodgers. And what Casey Stengel, no, it wasn't, was he a Brave manager? Or was he also a Dodger manager, Stengel?
I think he was running the tryouts, though, for the Dodgers. He might have been.
He was running the tryouts.
He was running the tryouts, and they didn't like little people. Unless you had to hit the ball, you really had to be way better than the other players.
Yeah, he told Rizzuto to get a lunch box, not a lunch box, but a shoe shine kit. And boy, that burnt him. I mean, that motivated him, and he makes the majors, and never did get along with Casey Stengel. They resented each other for some reason. Stengel admitted he made a mistake. He called Rizzuto a magician in the field, an acrobat, and respected him. Should have he been in the Hall of Fame? Should Reese be in the Hall of Fame?
Well, Reese more so, because he did have 2,100 hits, and you got to figure he lost 3 years in the military of his prime time was probably 500 hits. So you figure he would have been have 2,500 hits, and was a great shortstop. Shortstops didn't have much power then, and he was a base stealer. Reese was so much better, and personally, I out of the three, I would take Al Dark.
You know, I agree with you. I was not just because I was a Giant fan, but Al Dark had more power, certainly, than the others. He was clutch. He was a terrific number 2 hitter. And I can't compare them fielding-wise.
He was okay. He wasn't in Reese or Rizzuto's. But he
certainly had more punch offensively.
Yeah, he was an adequate fielder. And he didn't take, I would imagine he didn't care about people running into him at second base because he was like a top-notch college football player.
Not only top-notch, he beat out an All-American at LSU, and I can't, we may have had this conversation before on these airwaves, and I can never come up, his name always blanks. I always draw blanks on his name, but he was an All-American halfback. And at one time or another, Alvin Dark beat him out in football.
Yeah, but Dark was a tough guy, whereas Rizzuto was kind of wimpy. He was picked on a lot by his Yankee teammates. He had Joe DiMaggio to protect him.
Famous story, when he first comes up, they're having batting practice, and they'd rotate, and they'd always be boxing Rizzuto out and not letting him get his at-bats. And he did, as you say, have DiMaggio to protect him, because one day DiMaggio says, leave him alone. Let him bat.
And everybody would listen to him.
Yes. Yes, he was the one guy. I can't explain it. He had a quiet dignity, did DiMaggio. And that brings us to one of the most interesting facets of the 1949 to 1953 dynasty, is that it started out in 49 with DiMaggio as the regular center fielder, and the dynasty transcends the switch between DiMaggio and Mantle. Mantle comes up in 51, plays right field. DiMaggio in center, and ironically, in the 51 World Series, when Willie Mays hits a fly ball between right field and center field, DiMaggio pulls up short, and Mantle steps in a drainage thing, blows out his knee, and we'll never really know how great Mickey Mantle could have been, because he never played pain-free. He never properly rehabbed that injured knee, yet he was still as fast as anybody in the game. And the way that Casey and the Yankees handled the transition between DiMaggio and Mantle, who, as it turns out, they were not enemies. I've talked to several people. One of them wrote a book called DiMaggio and Mick. His name, I blank on his name right now, but he has several anecdotes about how DiMaggio was indeed helpful to Mantle and not at all his enemy. Have you heard stories to the contrary, Gene?
No, basically what I heard is basically Mantle was in awe of DiMaggio, and he would like whatever DiMaggio wanted, and he was going to pass the baton to Mantle, but he wouldn't be as good as him.
DiMaggio was not an easy person. He didn't greet rookies kindly. He, as did all these World War II vets with no real security, no real free agency of any kind. They were very protective of their jobs and the jobs of their teammates. So when guys like Mantle and Ford and Martin came along, they seemed to be carefree in comparison. DiMaggio would just glare and just say, we're talking about our money here. World Series money was, for a lot of these guys, not necessarily DiMaggio, was the bulk of the money that they made all year.
Yeah, it was as much as their salary. Like for a Ralph Houker or Charlie Silvera.
Right. And so I got to give Casey credit for the transition is the way I'd like to put it. Anything about Casey that you find particularly interesting or unique?
I remember Casey at the. My father worked a lot. My mother was a real jock, so we used to go to a lot of Yankee games. And she used to be a North Bears fan back in the day. And we used to go to the autograph signs. And the way Casey would clear the path, and he'd get out and get in his limousine. After the game was over, everybody waiting for autographs and going by the Yankee side, and he'd get in his limo, big line there. But the best thing I liked about Casey was when he gave his speech to Congress about the antitrust law.
Yes.
And Mickey agreed with him.
Mickey says, all I say is what Casey says, I say. He had no idea what Casey was talking about.
Neither did the congressman.
What a showman was Casey Stengel. Yet not the clown that he was reputed to be when Weiss first hired him, by any stretch of the imagination. How I remember Casey is his realistic approach to the game. He says, you're going to have 9 guys that hate you and 9 guys that love you. The trick is to keep the 9 guys that hate you away from the 9 guys that love you. Just not let them get together and keep some guys neutral. And he handled it. He was basically the forerunner to platooning. He was
Woodling and Bauer, because Woodling and Bauer were during that run were 290, 300 hitters, and they played 135, 140 games. One time I think he benched Bauer after he was 4 for 5 or something, because he knew he didn't do well. Before computers and everything, Stengel had it all in his brain. He said, well, you can't hit this guy. I don't care, you went 4 for 5 yesterday.
And a lot of it was just plain hunch with Casey. He just had a way of going beyond the statistics, beyond the probabilities. He could tell. Never forget him taking out Clete Boyer in the first inning for a pinch hitter. I mean, that's incredible. And so he had infielders. He had Andy Carey, maybe not as early as that dynasty, but guys like Andy Carey and
Bobby Brown was playing baseball to make money so he could be a brain surgeon.
Right. You know, I was just talking about Bobby Brown with Skip Lockwood, because we're talking about Yogi, and there's the famous story of Bobby Brown rooming with Yogi Berra. And Bobby Brown was going through med school, and he had Gray's Anatomy to read. And Yogi is literally reading a comic book. And he gets to the end of the night, they're about to turn off the lights, and Yogi says, "How did yours turn out?"
Supposedly nobody wanted to be Yogi's roommate either. Yogi was either a snorer or whatever. I think Yogi had a lot of rookies were like, it was on honor. Wow, I'm going to room with Yogi. But the thing was, supposedly, he was a terrible roommate, like for snoring and stuff like that.
Okay. Nobody roomed with Mickey Mantle, just his bags. They were a rowdy group, and right through the middle of it, right at the end of the dynasty, comes the Copacabana instance, where Hank Bauer, Billy Martin, Elston Howard,
Johnny Cooks.
Yankees. Who else?
Johnny Cooks.
Johnny Cooks, yes. And they went to see a show at the Copacabana, and I think it was a bunch of bowlers who were on the next table.
Cincinnati, I think. But there was a bowling group, and Sammy Davis was there.
Yeah, and they were making remarks. These bowlers were making remarks, racial remarks, and it was reputed that it was Hank Bauer who did the settling to the guy in the men's room and beat him up. But George Weiss blamed Billy Martin for it all.
That was his chance to get rid of him, because he was looking for a reason to get rid of him, because he blamed Billy for Whitey and Mickey.
Right, which in a sense, no one was going to hold back Mickey. There was no way. He was just a player, and it tore the heart out of the Yankees. Although they rebounded quite well, I mean, they never lost a beat with Bobby Richardson and what have you. But it broke up a combination of Casey and Billy, who came up. I think Billy came up in 1950, Casey's second year.
Yeah, he played for him from when Casey won it with Oakland. That's why the Yankees hired him. He won the Little League World Series or whatever. And Billy was one of his key guys.
Oakland Oaks, AAA in the Pacific Coast League. And Billy, who was from Berkeley, right next door to Oakland, was an overachiever then. And he was just like Eddie Stanky in the sense that he'd find a way to beat you one way or the other. He didn't have the strongest of arms. He didn't have the strongest of bats, you know.
Except in the World Series.
Yeah, till the World Series. And he took pride in the fact that he outplayed Jackie Robinson in virtually all of their games.
Right.
Not so much because he hated Robinson, but they shared a business manager, from what I understand. And it was just friendly competition. But competition to Billy Martin was... that's his middle name. Terrific overachiever.
As far as that dynasty goes, 49 to 53, the Dodgers would have also won 5 National League flags, except for the last pitch of the year in 50 and 51. They would have won 5 in a row. The last pitch of the year they lost.
Very good point. 51, I know was, of course, the Bobby Thompson.
And then Dick Sisler in 50.
Yeah, Dick Sisler with the Phillies, the Whiz Kids.
In the 10th inning, whatever it was. So the Dodgers were like, they could have been in 5 in a row too.
No, but it wouldn't have been the same 5 in a row because the Yankees won 5 championships in a row.
Yeah, I know, but they would have won 5 National League flags in a row.
It would have been a great achievement.
Right. And now the one thing about the Yankees, which is not really, Cleveland had like 3 Hall of Fame, 4 Hall of Fame pitching staff, and they had a good field team too. But the reason these 3 guys are not in the Hall of Fame is because they did not have the longevity. But in that 5-year period, Steady Eddie Lopat, Super Chief Reynolds, and Springfield Rifle Rashi were where they outpitched the Hall of Fame's tribe staff.
I did an interview with the aforementioned Charlie Silvera, who was the bullpen
Great
catcher. Great guy.
I met him at a dinner.
He jokingly said they should put those 3 in as a trifecta. So it would have been nice. They didn't have the overall stats, but I can make a case for Johnny Sane if you combine the fact that just like a lot of guys are getting in, combining their managerial records with their playing records. There's a case being made now for Gil Hodges that does indeed include his managerial career. Well, Johnny Sane didn't manage, but he was known as the best pitching coach of his time.
Probably all time.
I think, of all time, yeah. And I think that there should be a place for coaches. There should be a place for scouts. And if there is indeed a place for coaches, Johnny Sane would get in. Combining his pitching record with his coaching record.
Yeah, he won 20 games 4 times.
Yeah, and they had that expression in Boston when he pitched with Spahn and Sane, and pray for rain.
And ironically, Spahn was only 15 and 12 that year. They won the pennant.
Interesting, because
a 13-20-time winner.
I flashed on what a comparatively mediocre year Juan Marichal had in '71 when they won the pennant, the year of the Fox. It wasn't a bad year, but it wasn't his best year. So it's funny how teams win without their aces always, sometimes win without their aces excelling. Amazing how one stat can lead to another in one's head.
One thing they talked about is this year how the Red Sox clean up against the lower teams, whereas the Yankees do okay, but not as well. And to me, the Indians did okay against the Senators and Browns. They did okay, but the Yankees just completely, like in the 22 games, the Yankees would be like 18-4. The Indians might be like win 15 of them, but the Yankees always just dominated them teams. Whereas Cleveland and the Red Sox of that time, maybe the Tigers for 1 year, would give the Yankees a hard time when they played, but the Yankees would dominate the teams that they're supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, nothing says Yankee riches more in those days than the number of terrific catchers that were sprinkled around the American
The whole league.
Yeah. Sherm Lawler, Gus Triandos.
Yeah, Lawler played for a World Series with the Yankees.
Yeah. Yeah. Triandos did. You said?
Yeah, Triandos. Even Clint Courtney was a Yankee.
Oh, didn't know that. But there were several catchers that came out, and the Yankees would deal players to the least of the contenders. Washington, Kansas City, this, that, and the other thing. They would never deal with Detroit. They'd never deal with Baltimore. They would never deal with the White Sox. They were smart as hell. Weiss started out as the director of the farm system in the 30s and 40s.
I don't think hardly a catcher batted 280 then. And it was basically when I was growing up, it was Campanella and Barrow were far and above any catcher. If you hit I think the next highest catcher would probably be batting about 250 probably. Now, Charlie, you mentioned Charlie
Lawler was a pretty good catcher. Ironically, the third best catcher in the league at that time was Elson Howard.
Right.
Who came into his own. He was again the days before free agency, where a player could literally be not only trapped behind another player of superior skill, but trapped in the minors behind a number of players of superior skill. And now they've got the 5-year, if you don't bring him up and put him on the Major League roster in 5 years, he's, subject to the Rule 5 draft and what have you. And it's more like, it's not the plantation days anymore. Players have, and I'm sure a lot of people say, well, the arc has turned full cycle. But beyond that, it's better for the game, because we never would have seen certain guys come up if the rules weren't as rules today were as they were back then.
Yeah, I'm all for free agency, but I just think that they should. Well, they have the penalty tax you got to pay if you go over the thing, but still, there should be an actual, to me, a payroll cap, and these players would still be making $5-6 million a year. So, somebody's even the worst players make a couple million.
Well, how come they don't put a payroll cap on Tony Bennett and Barbara Streisand, for instance? How come they can make as much money as they...
But much money as they want to pay them.
As somebody wants to pay them, yeah.
Well, you can do that in baseball, too, but the total picture of your cap, like the other one, the other leagues have it, football, basketball. But that's why, with the Lakers getting LeBron, who else can they get to fit in with their salary? Remember, one time a whole bunch of people went to the Lakers, Malone and Peyton, so they could get a ring, so they only got $1 million a year, so that they could say.
Well, I go back so far. I remember when Jamal Wilkes went to the Lakers from the Warriors.
Right.
So
they won it that year with Rick Barry and Nate Thurman.
No, actually, it was with Nate Thurman was gone. It was with Clifford Ray at center.
Okay.
75.
I think they had Al Attles at the guard.
Al Attles was the coach.
The coach.
Joe Roberts was an assistant coach, and some of the guys they had it was one of the deepest teams ever. Very well balanced, very well coached. It's just a terrific team. Guys,
I think Barry is underrated overall. I mean, I know he's Hall of Fame, but I still think for that year he was so great.
Absolutely. He played in a time when the leagues were merging. He went off twice. He left the Warriors once to play for the Oakland Oaks across the bay. His father-in-law at the time,
Bruce Hale?
Yeah, Bruce Hale, a New Jersey guy. Barry was a New Jersey guy.
Yeah, Roselle Park. I remember him. I remember his high school team was only 4-20. He got 40 a game, but his team was really. They had a lot of good teams they played against, but his high school senior year team was horrible. I used to follow it pretty closely, but he got 40
Barry
a game.
Tells the story about either his dad or his grandfather. I can't remember which. I think they owned Macy's, for Christ's sake, and he was a gambler and blew it all. And Barry has vivid stories about, just his family losing all the bucks and
that underhand shot at 95% from the free throw line.
Right.
And his sons, I guess two of them or three of them played in the NBA, and they all shot the ball the regular way.
Right. And people don't know, he was an unbelievably great tennis player as well. Terrific athlete, Rick Barry. But he wasn't alone on that team. They had Mullen on that. Jeff Mullen was on that team. Like I say, Bill Bridges was on that team. Gus Johnson was on that team. It was just they had Bruce Smith from USF.
Right.
Maybe it was passed away. It's just a damn good balanced team, and they won it all, and it was broken up so quickly that it was a shame. I hated to see that. But, all right, let's close out on the Yankees. Let's talk about the aforementioned Ellie Howard and how great he really was and how deep they were. After the dynasty, but in 61, they had three catchers hit over 20 home runs. Ellie Howard, Yogi Berra, and Johnny Blanchard. I thought that was a great feat. There was a lot of times when Berra was playing the outfield and Howard was catching. Blanchard was a terrific reserve. I think of all the teams we talked about, the 61 team was as great as those five dynasty teams.
Yeah, I was at the game 2 when Joey J beat them in the World Series for the only victory by the Reds.
Joey J.
But the whole thing about that 61 World Series was Jack Kennedy was happier than Khrushchev because the Yankees beat the Reds.
All right.
But that Yankee team was. I went to all three games. Labor Day weekend, the Tigers came roaring in, 1.5 games out, and they were loaded with Colavito, Cash, Kaline, Jake Wood.
And Charlie Paw Maxwell.
Right. They came in roaring, and Yankees were up 1.5, and the Yankees swept them. I think I went to all three games over that Labor Day weekend. Horrible weekend for me. I think Ford beat Morphy 1-0 the first game. Then the Tigers lost the second one. And then the third game they had the Yankee killer going, Frank Larry.
The
Yankees even bombed him. And the Yankees, they went out 4.5. If they won that game, they would have still only been 2.5. They lost that game, so they were 4.5, and that was it. Yankees won, I think, 109 games that year. Detroit won 101.
And ironically, the Yankees won 111 games in 1954 when they were beaten out by Cleveland, who won 114 games. Well, the Yankees won more that year than they won in
that was Casey's best winning year.
Seasons. And Cleveland happened to pull a year out, and it wasn't such a surprise. Again, 3 Hall of Fame pitchers, Al Rosen,
Bobby Avila, Dale Mitchell, Larry Doby. You talk about catchers. Jim Hegan was a quality defensive catcher.
Absolutely, and ironically, his son was a quality first baseman defensively, and came up with the Yankees. So,
not
if
enough.
I'm not mistaken, Hegan was a coach with the Yankees later on. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but.
And they had George Strickland playing short. Now, I heard I was watching MLB the other night, and they were talking about Seager and Correa having back injuries, but they're both like 6'4", 6'5", and they're talking about big shortstops having problems because they're bending over so much. It's not like an outfielder where how many times do you really bend over for, maybe 3 times a game? There's a lot. Whereas the shortstop's always bending over, even on every pitch.
No, I could think of Cal Ripken.
Oh yeah, back when we were kids, well, I heard. I mean, you had Reese and Rizzuto, but everybody used to say how great Marty Marion was, who was 6'3".
Right. And Strickland was big. I don't remember. No, I read stuff about that Cleveland team. He was reputed to be a good defensive shortstop, but not that great, if I'm not mistaken. And I know Bobby Avila, who was like a batting champion, close to being a batting champion that year.
Yeah, he's 300 about a few times.
He was fairly mediocre at second base as well.
He's one of the first Mexican players.
Yes. I'll tell you, one of the first Mexican players was Ted Williams, who has a great deal of Spanish blood or Mexican blood.
Well, a lot of people back in them days, like I grew up in a predominantly Italian area. A lot of Italians, they became lawyers and stuff like that, and they dropped the IRA off their name.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well,
I thought it would be more like Anglo-Saxon type.
A lot of Jews did that as well. I mean, people were just trying to. We talk about prejudice today. There was a lot of prejudice back then.
Oh yeah, I'm a real mutt. But like generally, most people when I was growing up were one thing. You're Irish or Italian or all Polish or not like German, French, Polish, and Swiss. So.
Yeah. Well, it's a changing world. It's certainly different than when we were kids.
And they're talking about these 3 major leaguers that were used like some ethnic slurs when they were teenagers. Well, believe me, I work in the high school, and believe me, teenage guys really say some stupid stuff.
I know, but let me tell you something. It wasn't just racist; it was homophobic.
Yeah, but they say that too.
Grow up saying something like
I don't even know. I don't even know the actual stuff that they said, but believe me, I'm always correcting.
It doesn't matter, but I can't disagree with you more on this, Gene.
But the stupid
those
teenagers.
Things are. Could you imagine what's in these guys' heads that never come out if they're stupid? Like you say, they're stupid, but they let certain things out. Don't you think there are things in their head that much worse that they don't let out?
At that age.
Well, I'll tell you, once you meet somebody who's homophobic at 20, he's going to be homophobic at 25. He's going to be homophobic at 30. A racist at 20 all that's instilled in them.
When I was in the Army, everybody was homophobic. When I was in the Army, everybody it wasn't like all people were basically. But once you enter the real world,
I was in the Air Force. I disagree with that too. Not everybody was homophobic.
Well, a good portion, but back then, and the famous word of coaches. I don't even want to say what the coaches used to call their players. When if you couldn't produce right, if you're not producing manly enough, the terms that they use for you, they get fired.
You mean the sergeants and what have you?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not talking about coaches of football, especially football. You're playing like you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
It was
misogynistic stuff.
It was common language back then. Like you take Cap Anson, right? Cap Anson, who's the one who stopped Fleetwood Walker from playing or whatever, right? I'm sure that he was considered a hero by a lot of people.
Okay.
In his time.
We're talking
right now he's
such a different day.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's why I say these teenage kids. I mean, and believe me, I'm very interactive with them, especially the athletes, and they'll hear from me. I try and set them straight. You know what I mean? Because I tell them, look, you're going to be entering the real world. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't meet anybody, personally, I didn't meet any gay people until I started working in the post office. Like, you know, it was fine. You know what I mean?
But was it, okay, I don't even know why you brought that up.
No, what I'm saying is, growing up in high school, I didn't know anything. We had some blacks in there, and they were okay guys. They were smart and decent, played sports. But really, when I went into the post office, I worked with a lot of blacks in Newark, and there were some gay people there, and it was fine.
All right.
Whereas growing up, you hear, you know, things because you're not with them. You're not in the real world. You're in your own segregated area.
Okay.
That's like I heard when Hank Greenberg was playing out in the West. These people never saw a Jewish person before.
That's true.
You know,
absolutely true. But this is a different day and age, and
But I would disregard what teenagers say to a certain degree because they're in their own little world. They're in a high school and that kind of thing. And what really surprises me with athletes saying it, because usually I think that athletes are less racist than people who don't do sports. That's what surprised me.
I think they're being taken to task more for the homophobic thing.
Okay.
And I saw Gray, who was one of the players accused, and he seemed very, very sincere when he was denying it. He said, ask around the clubhouse as to the guy I am. So I'm willing to cut him some slack. I'm willing, but you know, it's the court of public opinion, and in today's day and age of the internet and Google and everything anybody does is on there for life, I guarantee you, when on the first paragraph of Sonny Gray's obituary, they're going to mention it. Well, maybe not that.
Yeah, okay.
But people aren't going to forget that.
Well, listen, we're like the same age almost. When we were in school, ethnic slurs were part of the regular language.
But this is 55 years, 60
No,
years.
I'm just saying how times have changed.
Oh,
right now, everybody's recording you. Everybody's taping you.
Right, and so you have to be accountable. And unfortunately, we don't get to choose the people who raise us and form us in the first 5 years of our existence when we're totally formed. Yeah. So my point is, and you can say that it's a good way to go through life, if you look at somebody and say, this may be a despicable human being, but I don't blame them as much as I do their parents.
If I was one of these players, basically, I would just say, hey, look, I was a stupid teenager. That's it. I was a stupid teenager. They're not my feelings now, but I was just a stupid teenager in high school. I guess they were in high school. They weren't out of high school, were they?
Right. I didn't follow it closely enough.
I didn't follow it closely, but I would just say, hey, because I didn't even really pay any attention to it because I deal with teenagers and. Believe me, they say stupid stuff, and I'm always correcting them.
Yeah, well,
and they do kind of listen to me. So.
Well, it's a good thing. You were how many years did you coach? Amateur coach in New Jersey?
Well, I coached like 800 games in my time.
Wow.
And then like now in high school, I do like 200 games a year. I do in a season between all the sports. But the girls can be pretty bad too, though. But I really don't know. I don't have the feel for them like I do the guys. Because I talk with the guys more, like.
All right, so you're keeping your hand in it. Hey,
thank
you for reliving some terrific memories.
One thing about Charlie Silvera, his lifetime batting average, his whole career, being that he was a backup for Yogi and didn't play much, his whole career is like one season, and he batted .284.
That's right, and he filled in a little bit. There was a stretch when Yogi was hurt, and he filled in for a couple of weeks very successfully. And like you said, I met him once and did a terrific interview.
Yeah, I had a great time with him at a BAT. He was at my table, and he wears the 1949 World Series ring. It was the only game he ever got in the World Series, and Preacher Road beat the Yankees 1-0 in the World Series. That's the ring he wears.
Whoa.
But he was like, he was
still
so funny.
hanging in there. He has to be around 95, and he's
still, he was so funny telling stories.
Yeah.
That ought to be a good deal for him. And how?
I'll send you an MP3 of the interview that I did with him.
Okay.
You'll enjoy it. I remember him the same way, a gregarious guy who he accepted the fact that he wasn't gonna be a regular, and he didn't bitch, and he kept coming back. And
it was a good deal being in the bullpen, getting the World Series check every year.
Right.
Him and Ralph Houck were on that. Were on all 5 teams.
And he was the second string catcher, and Ralph Houck was the third string catcher.
Right.
So, old Charlie Silvera. All right,
they
Gene,
call him Swede.
For your time.
Silvera. Okay.
You be well, and you be Brooks at the same time.
Okay.
And keep rehabbing that knee. I want to see you doing sprints by Thursday.
Well, I don't know about sprints, but I got a scrimmage to do next Wednesday.
Okay, don't sell yourself short. By Thursday, you're going to be terrific.
I'll be out on the field, making sure everybody's behaving themselves.
Thank you, Gene.
Okay.
On behalf of society, on behalf of the youth of America, as Casey would have said. Be well. We'll see you next time.
You too.
Thanks everybody for listening. It's New York Yankee baseball, past, present, future. I'm Ralph Tyko, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The guest has been author Gene Hutmaker. Adios, Gene. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be well.